Antony William Roland Penrose, born 9th September 1947. Have I got all that right so far?
You have, yes.
Good. I want to ask you, Antony, what is your very first memory?
Well, it's difficult because I've revisited this so many times, but it comes back as a vestigial memory of smell and touch. And it was a moment when I was 3.5 years old, and I remember playing with Picasso, and he smelt good because he had a kind of a cologne on, and he also had the odor of Gaulois, some French cigarettes. And he was very tactile, and I think this is what I remember most, is that the hugs and the cuddles were really extraordinary, and they were against the texture of his tweed jacket, which was a little bit scratchy. And this was in 1950 when he visited us at Farley Farm.
We've had extraordinary first recollections from many people over the past few years, but I think this has to be perhaps the most extraordinary, a recollection of the touch, feel and smell of Pablo Picasso. How remarkable. Explain where this is, what Farley's is, why Picasso was there, why you were touching him. Unwrap all this.
Well, at the end of the war, my mum came back from Europe suffering from what we would today understand as post-traumatic stress disorder. And my dad, who was very sympathetic and very caring, hadn't a clue what to do. So he thought, life in the country, that would be good for her. And, well, they went off and they bought this slightly run-down old farm with quite a run-down old farmhouse on it in a place called Chiddingly, which is in East Sussex. And it was called Farley Farm. And that became our home from 1949 onwards.
And in 1949, what and who are your parents? We know they're Roland Penrose and Lee Miller, but what stage in their lives are they? To give your father first.
Well, my dad was very much on the upswing of his career because he had stopped being a surrealist artist and a painter as such, and really diverted his attention to creating an environment for the furtherance of modern art in Britain. He created an organisation which is still going today called the Institute of Contemporary Arts.
Oh, famous.
But well, he kind of wanted to bring Parisian cafe society to London. And this was what he created as a meeting place for artists and a place where people could hang out and have exhibitions of those who were virtually unknown at the time. And it was indeed the start point for a great many important young British artists in that moment.
And what year had he been born?
He was born 1900.
1900,
Yeah.
So he's 47 himself.
He's 47,
by then.
and
in the 20s, 30s and early 40s, he's basically an artist.
Yes, he was living in France. He did about 13 years in France. And during that time, as he became a young surrealist artist, and at that moment, he met all kinds of really exciting people, people like Max Ernst and Juan Miro and Man Ray and Picasso, and he knew them all intimately. And
they treated him as their equal colleague,
as an
friend,
equal, yes,
because he was an artist of some note. Does his work still stand up?
Yes, his work is still standing. It's still good. He's got plenty of work in the Tate itself today. You know, he became a really important figure. He created the 1936 Surrealist exhibition in London, which was the first time Britain had been confronted with the Surrealist movement in a big way.
So this is a major figure in a sense in world art, because he brings the Surrealists to London.
Absolutely.
And the big names, again, of that exhibition in 1936 would have been?
Well, the big name, of course, was one of the most front runners was Dali.
Salvador Dali.
But then there was work by all of the above, Man Ray, Max Ernst, and Picasso at that time was close to the Surrealists. But there was work from people all over the world because Surrealism was an international movement.
So when you're born, he's on this upswing. It's all quite exciting
Very
for
much
him.
an upswing.
He's found a new role for himself, which is
Indeed.
satisfying.
Yeah.
But your mother, Lee Miller, and does she call herself Lee Miller or does she call herself Lee Penrose at that time?
She really calls herself Lee Penrose, but if she's writing anything or anywhere, you know, in a public persona, she's Lee Miller.
And what year is she born?
She was born in 1907 in Poughkeepsie, which is a little small town in upstate New York.
So she's American.
She is.
And in 1947, the year you're born, what has her story been up until then?
Well, she first of all became an art student in New York at the Art Students League. And by this time, she'd made a visit to Paris. She'd studied theatre design. She was, as a teenager, she was well on the road to an arts career. And then in 1927, she was crossing the road in New York, and she stepped out in front of a truck. And in that moment, she should have been killed. But a man who had been watching her, unsurprisingly, because she was very beautiful, he'd been watching her. He grabbed her. He hauled her back onto the pavement, and she did the girly thing. She fainted in his arms. And that was a very good move, because the guy's name was Condé Nast. He was the owner of Vogue magazine and Vanity Fair.
Grief.
And within a few months, she was front cover of Vogue.
You couldn't make this up.
Drawn by Georges Lepat. Well, it's all there as the documentary evidence of it.
My goodness. She's rescued in a Manhattan street by Condé Nast himself.
Yes.
I mean, I just thought it was the name of the company. I didn't realize it was a guy called Condé.
No,
Did people call him Condé? Hi there, Condé?
His first name was Condé, and he was Mr. Nast to most people.
She fell into his arms, and the next thing you know, she's on the front cover of Vogue magazine.
Yeah, she made it into the pages as a drawing. Then she made it on the front cover, and then she became Edward Steichen's favourite model at the time.
And who is he?
He was the chief photographer for Vogue. He was an incredible person, brilliant photographer. And he did very classical pictures of her, looking absolutely gorgeous in the really wonderful robes of the time, and also sportswear and casual wear and everything. And he made her into what we would today call a supermodel. And she was coast to coast in Vogue and Vanity Fair. And that came to a crash stop, because one of the images of her by Steichen was sold to an agency. And the next time she saw it, it was advertising Kotex, women's sanitary products. It was the first time the image of a real woman had been used in this context. And it was a scandal, because, society was so uptight about that sort of thing at the time. And her modelling career came to a crash stop. Nobody wanted the Kotex girl modelling their frocks. But what happened then was she simply said, "Pooh to you," and clutching an introduction from Steichen, she set off for Paris looking for Man Ray, whose work she'd known because he had been published in American photographic magazines. And she went and found him. And she became his pupil, his assistant, his lover, and his favourite model for the next 3 years.
In that order, probably.
Well, whichever order. Yes.
Anyway, that's what happened. Yeah, how long did were they together?
They were there for 3 years.
And was it a good relationship? Were they happy?
It was tempestuous, because he adored her. He loved her with such passion. But he was also very controlling, and he wanted to kind of dominate this woman and make her into his wife and so on. And she wasn't going to have any of that. She was totally uncontrollable, and this frustrated Man Ray beyond measure. And it actually gave rise to some of his most inspired works of art, which he made because he was angry with her or wanted to find a way of controlling her. But eventually, having had these 3 wonderfully productive years in which she started and ran successfully her own studio in Paris, she then went
You say she ran her own studio?
Yeah.
What was she doing in her own studio?
She was doing a lot of the stuff that Man Ray didn't want to do. He passed her a lot of his assignments, which was portraiture, fashion, pack shots. A lot of the kind of boring stuff you get when you're a photographer that if you're the top guy, you don't particularly want to have to do.
And who taught her her skills as a photographer?
Well, she began learning from her dad, who was an amateur photographer and had his own darkroom in the house. But she had this incredibly inquisitive mind. So whatever she was doing, she would be chatting to the person who was doing it, finding out how it was done. It was a kind of like a tutorial. And she would be as much behind the camera as in front of it, working out how it was done, what the best angles were, what the best processes were, what the best technology was. And so she learned on the job. And it was the same with Man Ray. She learned very quickly. And they really made a fantastic duo together.
But it came to an end, as these things do.
Yeah, well, she was unprepared for Man Ray's jealousy and his controlling nature. And so...
And he was jealous because she had other boyfriends?
She refused to be controlled by anybody. And the idea in Surrealism was that the only true relationship was free love.
Oh.
So sex and love were decoupled. And if you were in love with somebody, you could go to bed with whoever else you liked. And the men thought this was a very good idea.
Yes, well.
But they didn't see why the women should have the same freedom. So Lee said, well, if it's good enough for you, damn well good enough for me. And she went off and had all the lovers she wanted.
So surrealism for the boys, but not for the girls.
Absolutely. It was a bit unreconstructed in that way.
Well, I'd been quite keen on surrealism until now.
Well, it wasn't equal.
It certainly
the
wasn't.
women were not treated equally at all, which was a big blind spot among them.
And so she had a variety of boyfriends, lovers.
Yes, and it nearly drove Man Ray nuts.
I can understand that.
Well, yes, he
But as
he
you
wanted
say-
her all to himself.
Yeah, well, I've seen the pictures. I'm not surprised. So eventually it just breaks up. He can't cope. And she says, if you can't cope, well, that's fine.
And also, I think she wanted to assert herself as a photographer independently in her own right. So she packed up everything, organised it very carefully, arrived in New York, burst of publicity in the local papers, set up a studio and began photographing.
Wow. And what year is this?
This was 1932.
So she's 25.
Yes,
Gosh, very young.
yes.
And did she have money from her parents to enable this to happen?
No, they were not wealthy. She raised money from other backers, people who wanted financial involvement with her, and they put the money up. So she got the studio going. It was tough because you can imagine the recession was still very prominent and people didn't have money to spend on frivolous
Was this
things.
the famous 1930s
The
depression?
30s depression, exactly. But they managed and they came through and it was a success. It became the kind of studio that was the place to go if you wanted your portrait done.
And who are some of the names that she photographed in those days in the early
Well, there
30s?
was quite a lot of people who were totally unknown at the time, like Joseph Cornell, who is very well known now, but he was considered to be a lunatic from Flushing at that time. But then there were people like Lillian Harvey, who was an actress on Broadway, and she wanted Hollywood to know about her, so that she wanted arresting images to send to the casting directors. That sort of person.
And did she find a new boyfriend, partner?
Oh, several.
Oh,
Yes.
why not?
Why not, indeed?
Indeed.
Yes, yes. And some of them were illustrious and important people, like John Houseman, who became a significant actor.
Great actor.
Yes. And so he was madly in love with her. It was very funny talking to him about her. But
Give me his recollection of her.
oh, just how totally unpredictable she was. And that she would, stay up all night, drinking like crazy, playing poker for negligible stakes, having a fantastically funny... He said there was always laughter around her. And then she would go, when everybody else was going to bed, she would go to her studio and do a full day shoot.
Wow.
That was the sort of crazy things.
So she was wild, full of energy.
Full of energy, full of ideas.
Full of life.
Yeah, and she would never accept that there was something that she couldn't do if she wanted to do it. And that for a woman was a really significant thing.
Before your father comes along, during this earlier period, does she ever fall in love?
I think she was in love in her own way with many people, including Man Ray, including the man she married, Aziz Eloui Bey. I think she was in love with him. But for some reason it didn't last because either they were too prescriptive about her behaviour or it burned out or whatever, and it never lasted. The fact that it lasted with my dad was a miracle.
We'll come on to the miracle in a moment. Tell us about this first husband and when did she marry him and who was he actually?
Well, the studio in New York was going really well and she had this fantastic A-list of clients. And suddenly this Egyptian guy shows up.
Oh.
And everybody was a bit puzzled by why she should be so excited about his appearance. And his name is Aziz Eloui Bey. And Lee had met him when she had photographed his wife, Nimet, in Paris. Nimet was incredibly beautiful. She was Circassian and she was really, really lovely. Lee photographed her in Paris and in that moment met Aziz. By now, Aziz had divorced Nimet. To everyone's surprise, this guy shows up in New York and he asks Lee to marry him. And to everyone's total shock, horror and amazement, she did.
And why did she say yes to this man? Because being married to someone is a commitment.
She had a fairly open arrangement with Aziz. But why did she marry him? And I think one of the reasons was that the dream of owning and running her own studio in New York turned out to be a lot tougher in reality than she'd ever imagined. And she wrote someplace about how she found she didn't like it. There was always financial worries, there was always problems, there was always things that were very unromantic and unartistic that needed to be fixed. So suddenly when Aziz shows up, I think it was a way out. A way out of something that she thought was going to be fantastic, but wasn't. So she went to live in Cairo with him.
Oh, gosh.
Which was total contrast
Completely.
to everything that she'd ever done before.
And the whole culture of Cairo, I imagine.
Well, there weren't that many surrealist artists hanging around, that's for sure. But it was a very restrictive and somewhat repressive society, particularly the expatriate community. And she called the women the Black Satin and Pearls set. And their kind of most scintillating conversation was about the cucumber sandwiches at the bridge party last week, you know, that sort of thing. So boredom set in big time. And she sold this by grabbing her camera, taking a car and making long-range expeditions into the desert with few chosen friends. It was tough. The cars were only two-wheel drive. They kept on getting bogged in. There were sandstorms. They hadn't got adequate navigation. They used sun compasses and things to steer by. It was really quite, enterprising, tough stuff. And she brought back fabulous, surrealistically inspired photographs.
And of course, the nature of these pictures is totally different from what the portraits that she'd been doing in New York.
Absolutely, because she didn't have a commercial interest in the photograph. She was just making images that pleased her.
And Aziz was able to support her financially.
Oh, yes. She didn't have to lift a finger. He was very, very wealthy. So she lived in this huge house that had lots of servants. And so, yeah, I think that contributed to the boredom, actually. She didn't have to do anything to survive.
But by 1939, it's not working for them.
Well, by 1937, Aziz had recognized that she was unhappy. And being incredibly indulgent, so kind, so loving, he gave her an airline ticket to Marseille. And so she flew to Marseille, took the train to Paris, and when she got there, first day of her arrival, she was invited to this fabulous surrealist party at a great big house just near the Étoile. And all of her friends were there, including Man Ray and people like that, Max Ernst, and this quiet, shy, slightly reserved Englishman called Roland Penrose. And he met her there. And he said it was like being struck by lightning.
Oh.
He was never the same again.
Oh. 7 years older than her. He'd never known anything like it, this phenomenon.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think one of the things that fascinated him was her spontaneity and the fact that nobody could control her.
Gosh. And did he try to control her? Unwrap, if you can, the miracle of their marriage, because from when they do get married, how long are they together?
Until she dies.
Wow.
They married properly in 1947, a few months before I was born. And, my dad said, we married to give you a name. And I said, well, that was very kind of you, thanks, but wasn't that a bit unsurrealist? Well, it was more important to give you a name.
Well done.
That was really
he had the right priorities.
Yeah,
Proper
I
father.
think so.
So from 1937, when they meet, they are together. They
On and
become
off.
an item? On
Yes,
and off?
well, they
Does he
were.
have a wife already himself?
He had just divorced his French wife, who was called Valentine Bouet. She was a poet. and they'd just divorced. She had gone off to live in India. And he and Lee had this incredibly open arrangement. They never stood in the way of other lovers in their partners' lives. Basically, yes, it was the old Surrealist idea. You go off and have sex with whoever you want, but you don't stop loving that person. That's the key. And so they were always really dedicated to each other, and in this strange kind of way. And later on in life, when she became so very difficult, he kind of just buckled down and kept on with it. There was a point when he came very, very close to leaving her. But eventually he realized, no, that's not what I'm going to do. And he stayed.
And did she want to stay? He loved her and accepted the rules or the lack of rules. What was the nature of her love for him? Was it different, the quality of her love for him, than for the love she'd had for any other person? You talk about the miracle.
They did have something that was unique between them, and nobody else understood it because they didn't always appear to treat each other well, but they just kept coming back. There was something significant. I think it was a very, very deep understanding that was never self-evident to everyone else. And at times they worked incredibly well together. Like, when Roland was researching his book on Picasso, Lee was at his elbow taking hundreds of photographs of Picasso's birthplace, the places where Picasso lived, and people who were related to him, and the art school in Barcelona and Malaga and that sort of place. She photographed everything. They've got this amazing documentary of Picasso's life as a young person. And she did the same thing when he was writing about Miro. And so, yes, she was very supportive in that sort of way, in a quiet kind of way.
Going back to the war years, what happens when the war comes to each of them?
Well, by this time they have travelled in Romania and done an amazing road trip in rural Romania in 1938. 1939, Roland goes to Egypt because he can't live any longer without Lee. He takes her a book of poetry that he's written as a result of the Romanian trip. It's called The Road is Wider Than Long. He takes her the first printed copy. And he takes her a pair of gold handcuffs. And he tracks her down to a farm in southern Egypt near Asyut. And there she is staying with some friends. And he has a terrible trouble getting there. And finally he turns up. And she said she found both the handcuffs and the book of poetry thoroughly captivating. And that was it. Aziz had said to her that he wasn't going to let her go until she found somebody who loved her as much as he did and could look after her as well as he did. And when he met Roland on that occasion, he realized the time had come, and he gave Lee money, he gave her his blessing, and he gave her a boat ticket to London. And he continued to love her incredibly and deeply right up until he died a year before she did.
Goodness.
Yeah. That was the effect that she had on people. And
this is the most fascinating story. It's making me think what mundane lives most of us lead.
Well, there's an unspoken thing about both Lee and Roland, which was loyalty. And it was part of their integrity was to be loyal in ways that mattered. And that's how it worked for them.
So 1939, with the golden handcuffs, which is interesting.
Yes.
And she moves away from Aziz and into Roland's.
She goes and lives with Roland. They do a brief road trip around Europe. And then 3rd of September 1939, she's back in London on the first day of the Second World War. And she moves in with Roland. And the American embassy keep telling her to go home, but she won't, because she knows that the war is going to be incredibly harsh, if not fatal, for her French friends. People that she'd known and loved in Paris, and she knew the Nazis were probably going to try and murder them all. And she wasn't going to quit. Nobody was going to give her a gun or an airplane, so she eventually picked up her camera and used that as her weapon of choice for the war.
And where did she travel during the war, and how did she manage it?
Well, she stayed in London with Roland for most of the time, and then in 1944, about a month after the Normandy landings, by this time she was a war correspondent for the US Army, and that allowed her to go and cover a US Army forward evacuation hospital at Breckfield, which was just back of Omaha Beach. And she did her big first photo assignment for Vogue from there. And that was such a success. It gave her the domination of Vogue features for the next 18 months.
And of those wartime pictures, which are the most memorable to you?
Many, many of them are memorable for different reasons. Yes, of course, the high action stuff of the Siege of San Malo, where she photographed one of the first uses of napalm and things like that. They're of course, they're amazing. But I find the kind of stuff that she photographed because she was so compassionate are the most important. And for that, I mean the women who have had their heads shaved because they've been accused of collaboration as they've had German boyfriends during the occupation. That sort of thing is very profoundly moving to see how she's looking at these women and thinking, this is so wrong. She described it as being shaming and shameful. It went both ways, that behaviour.
Is she there for the liberation of Berlin?
She was there for the liberation of Paris.
Oh,
yes. She just made it to Paris in time for the Lib. And then, of course, she went to find old friends like Picasso. But there were so many gaps in the ranks. So many people she had known were missing and nobody knew what had happened. Working with Parisian fashion, as she had done, brought her in contact with a lot of Jewish women because they were the seamstresses. They were called les petits mains. They used to do the stitching.
The little hands.
Yeah, the little hands, exactly. And they were gone. Where were they gone? Nobody could say. They'd just been loaded onto trains and they'd never come back. And the more she found out about this, the more concerned she became. And so eventually when the Allies punched into Germany, she was right there. She was right on their heels. And that was when they began discovering the liberated concentration camps. I mean, the really serious death camp places. And she was there for the liberation of 4 of them. And it's the photographs from that sequence which I find totally compelling, absolutely ineradicable in my own mind. It's 48 years since I saw them, and I know each one in great detail because they've just burned their way into my memory. What they did for her, I cannot imagine. And it's those photographs of suffering, of man's inhumanity to man. And that continued because in Vienna she found children dying in a hospital because the black marketeers had stolen all the drugs. Now, this was not the brave new world that she was hoping for. This was still a world that was governed by crooks and people exploiting poor people and big corporations ripping everybody off. You know, it was not what she wanted for the next stage of humanity.
Does she go to Hitler's bunker? Have I imagined that?
No, you didn't imagine that. After she had photographed Dachau, she and her wartime buddy David Sherman found their way that night into Munich. And they knew already where Hitler's house was. And they pitched up there and they found it occupied by the Signal Corps. Now, they were always friendly with the Signal Corps because if you're a journalist, those are the guys you hang out with because they've got all the news. And the Signal Corps recognized them, let them in, made them welcome. And that was the moment that Lee was able to have a bath in Hitler's tub. Because being as it was Hitler's house, it was the only building in the whole of Munich that had coal. So it had hot water. Goodness. And so in she hops. And I said to David Sherman, because he hopped in after her, I said, you know, how could you bear to get naked into Hitler's tub? He said, my boy, it was just pure instinct. We hadn't had our clothes off in 6 weeks. We stank worse than a bunch of polecats. And there was hot water and soap and towels, and we just couldn't resist. And he said, then we realized we had a scoop.
Who took the photograph of her in the bath?
Sherman. And she took a photograph of him.
Extraordinary.
And while they were doing that, actually at 4:45 that afternoon, way across Germany in Berlin, Hitler and Eva Braun had killed themselves. So that image is kind of like, it's an amazing icon of a sort of end of the war, the end of Lee's career as a photojournalist, and all of that.
It's not surprising that she comes back with post-traumatic stress disorder, as we would now call it.
Exactly.
And she finds your father loyal, loving, not quite knowing how to handle this because he's slightly old school English.
Yes.
But he has a bit of private money.
Yes, he fortunately had a private income, which allowed him to...
He's able to buy this, this property called Farley's.
That's right, yeah.
So, but how does she become pregnant? Because over the years she must
became pregnant in the usual way.
Yes, but what amazes me is that she'd not become pregnant previously because
it was told to her frequently that she could never have babies. And the reason for this is at the age of 7, when she was a little girl, she was... And in that moment, she was infected with gonorrhea.
Oh, this is too awful. At the age of 7?
Yes, at the age of 7. This was 1914. And it was about another 14 or 15 years before the antibiotics needed to cure her were invented. And so she had to carry that disease at a clinical level.
And was this some awful family member?
It was... her mum was ill. She was sent to stay with friends. They went out and they left her in the care of another adult. And that was him.
Oh, God. So she had no expectation of having children and suddenly finds she's pregnant.
Yeah, well, they said that she could never have a baby, but I proved them all wrong.
You did?
Yeah.
And was she happy to be pregnant?
To begin with, yes. She was very happy. It was a new adventure. It was something she'd never done before. And then a couple of things happened. I think post-traumatic stress began to kick in a big way. Her own health was very shaky after all she'd been through. And also, as I understand it, she had a really savage dose of postnatal depression.
Because she's about 40 at the time she's having it.
She is 40, yes. Yeah.
Gosh, so that's an added...
Well, it was, it was particularly at that time in medical history, it was very unusual.
To have your first child at that age.
Yes, yeah.
So you come along and say, who's going to look after you?
Well, she was smart enough to realize that she did not have the normal maternal instincts. So she engaged a series of nannies. And to begin with, they were lovely, cozy people. And then they sort of changed every so often. And it went on like that until I was about 4.5. And then she took on this youngish woman in her mid-20s called Patsy Murray. She was of Irish descent, and she had that wonderful, calm, beautiful, compassionate nature. She just was so naturally kind to all small creatures, including me. And she became my de facto mum. And she just was there always. She was this person that I felt the closest to in the whole world.
She lived in?
Yes, she lived in the house. Just her and me and a great big dog.
Give us a flavour of some of the rooms. Where was her room?
Oh,
Nanny Patsy's
next to
room,
mine.
Next to yours.
Next to mine.
And did you call her Nanny or Patsy?
No, I just called her Patsy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was in my life for 57 years.
Oh, my.
Yeah, she became the grandmother to my children and the great-grandmother to theirs. And all the time, she had her own daughter called Georgina, who is a truly wonderful person, and I grew up knowing well, and I'm still in touch with today.
What had happened to Patsy's husband then, the father of her daughter?
We never know. Nobody knows.
And nobody asked her, but because if you know...
Lots of people asked her, but they all got the same answer, which was they won't tell anything. But you can see the resolve, the kind of mental strength.
Well done, Lee, your mother, finding her.
Yeah.
And was it easy for Lee to let go and say, Patsy's looking after you? What was your relationship with Lee as you grew up?
Deteriorated and got worse and worse. It's very difficult having a parent that's an alcoholic, which is what Lee became. She became an alcoholic and a depressive.
And how quickly did that happen after 1947?
I think fairly soon.
Fine.
Like by the 50s, she was well on the downslope.
Because she had no work, so the purpose she used to have was no longer
partly
there.
She had no work because she became so unreliable that, Vogue wouldn't give her any more commissions. But then I came along and then various things happened. But really she struggled and I struggled because as a kid you want constancy. And with an alcoholic you don't get it because you never meet the same person twice.
Going back to the first memory of yours, when you're 3.5, Picasso, the intimacy with Picasso, how did that come about? How was Picasso at Farley's, your family home?
Well, of course, he had known both my parents since the 30s, and he came over to England for a peace conference that was to be held in Sheffield. And there were various other people, including members from the Soviet Union and important, prominent international people. But the British government thought it was some kind of communist plot, so they sabotaged it, and it closed after one day. And Picasso returned to London, and the press hounded him. So my parents sprung him and whisked him away down to Sussex.
I mean, literally.
Literally. They
in the car. They got him in the back of the car.
Stuck him in the car.
Almost put
I wouldn't say it was a blanket over his head, but they got him out of there pretty fast. And, you know, in those days, the press weren't expecting that. They weren't particularly savvy about how to follow. They certainly didn't have a clue that they might have gone to Sussex. And so that's where they went. Gosh. And it was a lovely visit. He came and had probably about 48 hours on our farm. And
did he renew his intimate, amorous relationship with Lee at the time?
I wouldn't know.
But he might have done.
They just got up to just about anything you can think of.
The only reason I ask is I seem to remember you telling me once upon a time, maybe I shouldn't be repeating this, that you found either he bit your bottom or you bit his. So,
I bit him. I bit him on the wrist.
Oh, fine.
But that wasn't a sexual relationship.
Oh, no, I wasn't implying anything between you and he. I don't. Maybe I mentioned this. I somehow thought that you had caught the pair of them.
Oh no, nothing like that. No.
Oh, tell me what happened then. How did the biting happen?
Oh well, we'd been to see our big old Ayrshire bull on the farm, and when we came back, it reminded Picasso about bullfighting, and it was way before I understood how really obnoxious bullfighting is. And I was then delegated as being the bull. So I would put my horns on and thunder across the room. And Picasso was, of course, the matador, and he would be shaking his coat, and I would be supposed to knock him over and gore him, or something friendly like that. But I never got anywhere near that because he would wait until the last split second and then leap to one side, and I would go splat into the wall or the furniture or something. And after a few times I thought, I need a different strategy. So I stopped and I watched and I waited. And when he wasn't looking, I crept up and I bit him. And he turned around and he bit me straight back.
Well done.
And my mum recorded that before I started to yell, Picasso said, "Tiens, that's the first Englishman I've ever bitten."
Oh, well, that was a sort of surrealist moment in its own way.
It was a distinction, really.
What did you make of Picasso? Your father wrote this famous multi-volume biography of Picasso. Did you have any further, can you give us your view of Picasso as a human being from your perspective?
Well, what I remember is that he was funny and kind, and I loved going to his homes because they were always full of pets and animals. And so he had a pet goat called Esmeralda, who slept in an old packing case outside his bedroom door. And people would say, "Why do you have that smelly old goat outside your bedroom?" And he would say, "Well, she's a little afraid of the dark. And when she wakes up in the night, if she's upset, I can call out to her and she goes back to sleep." I thought that was just so sweet. And there was cats and dogs and pigeons and parrots and just about everything that you can think of. And I loved it because it was very free and very funny and light-hearted. There was always fooling around, putting on masks or drawing silly doodles and stuff like that, you know.
So Patsy was bringing you up.
Mm-hmm.
How was your father during these years, your childhood?
He was a very good man, but he hadn't got a clue how to be a father because he had been brought up in a Victorian family where children were seen and not heard, and there was very little affection or contact given. But he got over a lot of that, and I wouldn't say he was close with me as a young person, but he was very compassionate, not particularly understanding, but very kind and very sort of caring in his own distant way.
And he had a challenge because he was coping with Lee.
He certainly had a challenge with her. And I mean, the difficult thing about alcoholics is you never know what's coming, because she could be so perfectly on point and, you know, absolutely everybody would adore her and she would be so sharp and sparkly, but you couldn't rely on that happening.
And you and she, did you fight?
We fought like two cats in a bag. We elevated just family feuds into an art form. And
what sort of things sparked the rows?
Anything. Didn't need anything to spark the row. There was just a row. And we would deliberately find ways of annoying each other. You know, it was just horrible. It really was.
Did you go away to school? Where were you?
Oh, yeah, I was packed off to boarding school at the age of 8 and hated it. Absolutely hated it.
And where were the boarding? You went to a prep school and then...
Yeah, I went to a prep school, Port Regis, which is quite a posh school now, but then it was pretty grim. It was post-war. Things were a bit Spartan anyway. Yeah. Looking back on it, the teachers, I think, were trying to do their best, but I recognize among many of them now the signs that they were suffering badly with their own post-traumatic stress syndrome, probably as a result of their war experiences. So it was confusing, it was harsh, it was, not a good experience at all.
And then you go to a public school?
Yeah, well, I was so thick that I had to take a year out and go to a crammer in London. Oh. What nobody realised, and I didn't know myself until 20 years ago, is that I was heavily dyslexic. Mm-hmm. And so they just said, oh, he's thick, stick him in the back row. And that was fine by me. I just used to sit in the back row and stare out the window. And then they stuck me through a cram school, and I got to Bryanston.
Oh, excellent.
Well, Bryanston was a very good school. I mean, by that time, I was too angry and too confused to really get the best out of it.
And angry, were you conscious of what you were angry about? Or?
No, not at all.
Oh.
No, but I was just a rebel without cause, you know.
But it was because you had an alcoholic mother.
Mainly, yeah.
And a loving but distant father.
That's right, yeah.
And Patsy was there, but she is really a nanny.
I adored her, but I always knew that she wasn't mine. And so there was always that possibility that I might come home and she'd gone, you know.
Oh, so you were fearful every holiday?
Oh, yeah.
Would she still be there?
I knew I was pretty confident that she was always there, but I always knew there was a possibility that she had every reason, if she wanted to disappear.
And when you're a teenager at Bryanston, what were your ambitions in your head? What did you think I'm going to do with my life?
I wanted to get as far away from the art world as possible, so I wanted to be a mechanical engineer.
And did you get anywhere with that?
Well, up to a point. I left with 10 O-levels.
That's good.
Before I did any A-levels. And I went to work in a factory. And I worked for a company in Bath called Rotork that was founded by Jeremy Fry. But I've really rapidly understood that my mathematics was so bad, my understanding of maths was just terrible. And to be an engineer without maths is just not possible. And so I was kind of wondering what on earth I should do. And then I was invited by my cousin onto a big farm up in Norfolk, which he owned and ran at the time. And suddenly they were short for a combine driver. So I became, for the next couple of weeks, a combine driver. And this was wildly exciting. I was never allowed to do anything like that at home on our own farm. And that was the moment I decided to go to the Royal Agricultural College, Cirencester. And I did. And that was a whole different, wonderful way of life.
So different. You're not a surrealist now.
I'm not a surrealist. I'm not an engineer. I'm a farmer.
When did you go on your trip around the world?
Well, when I got back from Cirencester with my degree and everything, my father took one look at me, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and he thought, this is the last thing we want around here. And he said, because we had, our farm was being run by a very, very diligent and productive manager, and he knew that I would only come along and upset everybody. So he said, you've always wanted to travel. This would be a good moment to do so. And so I had a Land Rover, which I then made suitable for what we were doing with a big roof rack and a little kitchen in the back. We were going to camp, and off we went. And spent the next 3¼ years driving around the world.
Gosh.
In this Land Rover.
I've written a biography of A.A. Milne.
Yes.
And Christopher Robin had problems with his parents.
Yeah.
And he told me that his life changed and he was ultimately rescued by marriage. And that freed him from his family and created what became his life, the security of his life. And actually, as a result of that, he eventually was able to understand and forgive his parents.
Yeah.
But it was the marriage that did that. How did you meet Susanna? And are there any echoes in what I'm saying in your story?
There's very strong echoes. I met Susanna just before I was going to leave with the Land Rover. She joined us in Perth, Western Australia. We married in Auckland, and she came with us the rest of the way through South and Central and North America. And we arrived home. And there was a lovely house on the farm that my father allocated to us, and we moved in. And my parents were away when we got back. But when they arrived, the first thing that Susanna did was invite Lee to dinner. By now, Lee was well known as a celebrated gourmet cook, written up in Vogue and House and Garden. And the idea of young bride inviting celebrated gourmet cook to dinner was completely lost on me, because all I could think of was, hey, don't you realize that's the enemy? And Susanna said, she's not my enemy, and if you shut up long enough, you'll find she wants to be your friend. And so I did what I was told, and Lee and I made friends.
Oh.
It was really wonderfully special. We were able to talk and have conversations without assassinating each other. I wouldn't say it was a tremendously affectionate or close relationship. It wasn't a mother and son thing, but I would say it was like two battle-scarred warriors who realized they should have been fighting on the same side. And it was great. Only just in time, because 2 years later she died of pancreatic cancer.
And how old was she by then?
She was 70.
Yeah, so 1977.
77 years.
Gosh. When we first met, which was about 26 years ago now, I remember you telling me about Lee, who I'd sort of heard of. But I knew your father, who was Sir Roland Penrose. When was he knighted?
Oh, crikey, it was in the 60s.
Yeah.
I forget exactly when, 66, 67, something like that.
So he was a great man. He was the famous man.
Yeah.
And you told me about your mother. And you also told me that you had plans to make her work better known.
Yes.
This was because, I think, you discovered material.
Well, Susanna discovered the material after Leah died, and we found that we had this incredible stash of something like 60,000 negatives. And it was all stuff that everybody had forgotten about. I certainly had not any idea at all about her accomplishments as a photographer. And this was a whole new body of work, but it was also a whole new person, because I had to get away from the idea that she was a useless drunk and that she had actually been this tremendously talented, daring, incredible photographer and writer. And so with my father's encouragement, Susanna and I started to build the archive, and it took a long time. And the turning point came when Thames and Hudson invited me to write the biography, Lives of Lee Miller. And that was when we began to rehabilitate Lee's public life.
Can I say, you are brilliant, because you have turned her into the Frida Kahlo of photography. I mean, she is now world famous as a result of your endeavors.
I think she did that herself.
Yeah, but
all I had to do was let her out of the box.
You let her out of the box, but it's been extraordinary. You have been able to share her gift with the world and the variety of her gift as well. And now a movie was made. I mean, Kate Winslet read your book. Is that how it happened? I mean, how did that film come about?
Kate bought the book many years ago in America, and she read it, and she kind of like put it to one side, saying, "Gosh, I'd really like to do Lee Miller one day." And then it was about 10 years ago, so I guess it was about 2015. She was in Toronto, and she met the guy who had the movie rights at that time, and decided that she wanted in as Lee Miller and as a producer. And that was when it all started, because she was the most incredible producer. She commissioned the screenplay from Marion Hume and Liz Hannah, and it was a fantastic screenplay.
And when you sat and watched the finished film of your mother, with whom you'd had a complicated life,
Yeah.
what did you make of the movie? What did you make of the portrayal?
Well, the movie starts with this violent scene in San Marlo, and then we cut to Lee as the old woman in our home at Farley Farm in Sussex. And for me, that was devastating, because I'd seen a production still of Kate with the makeup on, and I thought, gosh, that looks like Lee. There she was on screen, and it was this moment of total cognitive dissonance. I just couldn't figure out which way was up, because there was my mum for real on the screen. I thought, how did they do that? She's been dead for years. Now it's a movie, it's Kate dressed up. No, it's her for real. Things like the hand gestures, the voice tone, the way she poured a drink, the way she smoked a cigarette. How Kate got that, it was just intuitive with her. She got it so precisely that I thought it was Lee come back to life for real. And it was a most overwhelmingly emotional moment. And that was the first time I saw the movie completed.
We're coming to the end now. This has been about your childhood, but an extraordinary life you have led. Did things work out with Susanna?
Susanna and I were very happy together. We had 3 children, and then she died of ovarian cancer in 1992. And that was a really terrible moment for me. But kind of what saved my life was I met my present wife, Ros, and fell in love and started again. And we've been together ever since. And she is a truly wonderful person, incredibly supportive of what I'm doing. And I'm very happy with her. And I must say, she's very, very much part of everything that I do.
Well, I have to say, I think I, too, would rather marry a farmer than a surrealist, given the story you've told me. But you've been so much more than a farmer, I know. 3 quick questions before we end. I'm going to ask you to conjure up, and it's got to come immediately into your head, you can't think about it, a moment of joy from your life.
I think one of the moments of joy was actually in the desert of northern Australia. And I stood there, and as far as I could see, it was flat, it was spinifex, there was no trees, there was just this red earth and the spinifex grass. There was nothing except coming from the distance, thump, thump, thump. That was a kangaroo passing. And for me, just to be in this solitude with this beautiful animal who came quite close to me, that was a moment that was very rare, and it's still really important in my life.
That's beautiful. And now, again, what comes immediately into your head, a moment of sadness.
Oh, of course. I think my moment of greatest sadness was losing Susanna. She died in my arms. And she fought like crazy because we had our little boy at 4.5 years old, and she was like a tiger. She was doing everything she possibly could to beat the cancer, but it got her. And yes, when she died, it was like part of me died with her.
When did your father die?
He died in 1984, and I was with him when he went. And
so he was 84 by then?
Yes, he was 84.
And ready to die? He was tired and old?
He was tired, he was old, his health was failing. He was very interested in his grandchildren. Our 2 little girls were a source of fascination for him. He was very interested to see Lee's work being rehabilitated and thinking it was going to become widely known. Lives of Lee Miller hadn't been published when he died, but he could see that something interesting was happening, and he was happy about that.
Where can I see your mother's work currently in Britain? I know it's all over the world. And where can I go to see some of your father's paintings?
Well, at the moment, we have a fantastic exhibition at the Tate Gallery, Tate Britain, until 15th of February, and that is it's certainly the biggest Lee Miller exhibition anywhere in the world ever. Beautifully done. We always have Lee Miller's work in our own galleries at Farley's, which is open beginning of April till the end of October. And so Lee is going to pop up all over the place. There's other exhibitions planned globally. And so, yes, there'll always be opportunities to see her work. Roland, the Tate has some significant works by him in their collection, and there's always works by him on display at Farley Farmhouse.
Good. I'm coming. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
As we finish, extraordinary life you've led, remarkable parents. I'm so pleased that you're as sane as you are. Notwithstanding.
How do you know that for sure?
I think you're sane. So your surrealist parents, who were both, they were extraordinary, gave you that. Or maybe Patsy gave you that. Why do you think you are so, you are sane? I mean, I've now met you several times, and there's an inner calm.
Roland had an inner calm. He was a Quaker. I didn't become a Quaker until I was in my 40s, but that's good for inner calm. We were both what you call non-theistic Quakers. We don't believe in God, but we like the ideas that go with being a Quaker, and that's very important. But the other things that give me calm is I spend a long time walking in the woods at home. I really love that, and I love being close to nature. Whatever the weather.
What has life taught you, finally?
That there is way more good than there is bad in people and things. So just keep pressing on and try and make that good shareable as I find it.
Thank you for sharing your story with us, Antony Penrose.
Thank you.